Good morning, and welcome to the Museum of the San Ramon Valley's virtual speaker series. I am Dan Dunn, the director of the museum. Today is the 9th presentation in this series. Past presentations have included Highway 21, the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, California's First People Then and Now, and last month, Bill Clarkus took us on a secret history tour of San Ramon. Our presentation today is entitled The History and Future of the Sunol Water Temple. And I will admit to wanting to know why there was a classical Greek temple in Sunol, and we have the right person to explain the temple's past and its exciting future. Our presenter, Carla Schulfeis, is the Environmental Improvement Program Manager for the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission. Carla has over 30 years of experience developing watershed education programs and spearheading watershed management and protection projects in several Bay Area watersheds. In her current position, Carla has worked with a variety of partners to develop and implement watershed protection and restoration projects, ecosystem health, including acquisitions to protect drinking water. Carla has worked on numerous education projects and works closely with local tribes to develop education programs and long-lasting partnerships to celebrate the heritage of local Native tribes. Please use the chat window at the bottom of the screen for any questions that you have. Feel free to send in questions at any time during the presentation, and we'll address them at the end. And now to our presentation. It is my great pleasure to introduce Carla Schulfeis. Carla?
Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here to talk to you about the Sunol Water Temple. I am going to share my screen, so bear with me for just a minute and I will get the presentation up and running. Can everybody see my screen? Okay, so when you talk about the history of the Sunol Temple, it's also, you're really talking about the history of the city of San Francisco's water system. And so today, I want to give you an overview of the current San Francisco water system, also known as the SFPUC, and also talk about the history of the water system and how the Sunol Temple ties into that long history. And then we can dive into talking about the Sunol Temple, its history, and also what is happening in and around the Sunol Temple today. So the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, also known as the SFPUC, owns and operates the Hetch Hetchy Regional Water System. The SFPUC delivers an average of 260 million gallons of water per day to 2.7 million people in Alameda, Santa Clara, San Mateo, and San Francisco counties. This orange area here represents our service territory. This is where we provide water. Since the early 1930s, San Francisco's drinking water has flowed from Hetch Hetchy Valley in Yosemite National Park. And the water travels 167 miles through a series of tunnels and pipes before it reaches reservoirs and taps in the city. It takes about 2.5 to 4 days for the water to travel from Hetch Hetchy to Crystal Springs Reservoir. 85% of the water that comes from Hetch Hetchy Reservoir, and the remaining sources come from the Alameda Creek Watershed, and also the Peninsula Watershed, and a small amount comes from groundwater. For 100 years, the SFPUC has been generating hydropower. As the drinking water flows downhill from Yosemite to the Bay Area, the natural force of gravity is harnessed to generate 100% greenhouse gas-free hydroelectric power. This power provides electricity to many city buildings in San Francisco. The SFPUC also provides sewer services to businesses and residents in the city. The Hetch Hetchy Regional Water System wasn't always this vast, expansive, and complicated system. It had very humble beginnings. Oops, did I? The San Francisco Public Utility, oops, sorry, I missed a, there we go, there we go. The first 7 decades of San Francisco's municipal water supply story is about the development of local water sources by entrepreneurial individuals and small water companies. Local creeks, springs, and wells provided water to early settlers beginning in the mid-1700s with the first Spanish explorers. And this is a picture of Lobos Creek, which supplied water to San Francisco from 1858 to 1893. And it could provide a constant flow of 2 million gallons of flow per day. And it still supplies some water to the Presidio today. By 1849, most of these sources of water were no longer adequate to provide for the growing population. The population of the city grew from 800 in 1846 to 40,000 in 1849 and 78,000 in 1860. This sudden birth and overnight development of the city during the gold rush sparked a dynamic municipal quest for new sources of drinking water. With local sources no longer adequate, households bought water by the barrel. Water was brought in on boats like this Water Witch boat here that came from Marin. Peddlers competed in the streets with barrels and carts and on the backs of donkeys, serving regular water routes. And it was often a very lucrative endeavor selling water. During one period when water was scarce, Juan Miguel Aguiar, a local water peddler, reportedly charged as much as $1 in gold for a bucket of drinking water. His thriving business earning him $30 a day in 1851. Procuring water in the early days of San Francisco was quite competitive. Several companies started developing water supplies in the city, putting pipes in and starting to build reservoirs. It began with the spring that Juan Miguel Aguiar, the water peddler, first used. The first pipes were laid in that spring to provide water to the city. By the mid-1800s, there were many companies providing water to San Francisco. And the competition between companies was often fierce and often underhanded. In 1864, the Bensley Company was faced with soil eroding into one of its aqueducts. Water was being delivered to their customers, and they needed to find clean, clear water to settle the turbidity. Well, where were they going to get this water? They solved the problem in a sneaky way. The company tapped into another company, Spring Valley Water Works, Maine, and sold the blend to its customers. The irregularity was discovered, and the press had a field day exposing the company and their underhanded ways. The incident led to the demise of the Bensley Company, which was bought out by Spring Valley Water Works. It seemed like anybody could start a water company. Alfred Nobby Clark lived in a mansion in Eureka Valley. He had an ongoing feud with his neighbor. Not sure what that was about, but it prompted him to start his own company, Nobby Clark's Waterworks. And these tanks here are the tanks for his company up in Stanford Heights. And he was competing directly with his neighbor's company, Mountain Spring Water Company. Eventually, the Spring Valley Waterworks Company bought up all of these small companies in the city. And eventually in 1903, Spring Valley Waterworks was bought by the Spring Valley Water Company, the predecessor to the SFPUC. Between 1850 and 1852, San Francisco was destroyed by fire 6 times. San Francisco's search for increasing quantities of potable water attempted to keep pace with the rapid growth and development as San Francisco grew from a sleepy town into a major world metropolis. Due to repeated fires that destroyed the city, there was a pressing need for a reliable source of water to fight fires. The most famous being that of the Great Earthquake and Fire of 1906 that killed over 3,000 people and destroyed 80% of the city. The disaster provided political will to search for more reliable municipal sources of water far afield from San Francisco. It also spurred city leaders to come up with more reliable ways to store and use water to fight fires. In order to address the growing need for water, the search began to look for water sources outside of San Francisco. Spring Valley Waterworks started looking for sources of water in San Mateo County in the 1860s. The peninsula watershed looked promising. The Pilarcitos Creek watershed had an average of 49 inches of rain annually, the most productive watershed on the peninsula. And the flat San Andreas Valley on the peninsula was the perfect site for a reservoir. In 1872, with the construction of Pilarcitos Dam and the associated infrastructure, Spring Valley Waterworks delivered water from the peninsula to San Francisco for the first time, which was a pretty big deal at the time. By 1888, Spring Valley Waterworks had built 4 dams and reservoirs on the peninsula. Over the years, Spring Valley purchased over 90% of the Pilarcitos and San Mateo Creek watersheds to ensure the water supply would be protected. As early as 1875, Spring Valley started buying up land in Alameda and Santa Clara counties with the idea of furthering the city's ability to provide reliable water supply to San Francisco. Land purchased in the upper Alameda Creek watershed up in this area here were fed by streams from Mount Hamilton. And much of this land was purchased to develop Calaveras Dam, which the construction of Calaveras Dam didn't start until 38 years later in 1913. SFPUC continues to purchase property in the Alameda Creek watershed to protect water supply and now owns more than 38,000 acres in the Alameda Creek watershed. Spring Valley also purchased extensive artesian lands in the Livermore Valley. Spring Valley's chief engineer, Herman Schlusser, decided that these gravel beds, like those in, in Sunol Valley, were good water sources. He started drilling the wells in 1898, and in 1909, a 30-inch pipe was installed to transmit the water from Pleasanton to Sunol. In 1904, Spring Valley acquired the Vallejo Mills properties near Niles, consisting of a dam, a brick flume, a mill constructed in the 1840s by Don Jose de Jesus Vallejo, a brother of General Vallejo. These properties were excellent locations for new reservoirs to serve the increasing demands of the Spring Valley Waterworks customers. The entire Alameda Creek watershed drainage, which is approximately 700 square miles, flows through the area near the town of Sunol and is restrained at the entrance to the canyon. 3 historic sources of water, which include Alameda Creek, Arroyo de la Laguna, and the Pleasanton well fields, all collect in this area. In order to capture this water and transport it down Niles Canyon and across the bay to the peninsula and beyond, Spring Valley built the Sunol Filter Galleries, Sunol Dam, and the Sunol Aqueduct. Sunol Dam, a concrete 31-foot high dam, backed up the creek drainage to saturate gravel beds, which are located adjacent to Alameda Creek. The groundwater percolated through gravel beds and is collected through a concrete tunnel or filter gallery that is about 9,000 feet long. And this is the filter gallery being shown that's under construction. And the water then flows through brass pipes in the concrete into the inside of the gallery. And the gallery could dependably yield 5 million gallons of water per day. And under flood conditions, the galleries produced up to 20 million gallons of water per day. Prior to the construction of the Hetch-Hetchy Aqueduct, half of San Francisco's water supply, about 6 million gallons per day, passed through these filter galleries, and Sunol Temple. The Sunol Valley Water Company, including the temple, was purchased by San Francisco in 1930 for $40 million. When Hetch Hetchy Reservoir was constructed, these pipelines were no longer essential parts of the city's water system and fell into disuse. Both Niles Dam and Sunol Dam were removed in 2006 to help support the restoration of steelhead trout to the Alameda Creek watershed. And if you look over here on the left-hand side of the picture, this is a fish ladder that was built when the dam was built. I just thought that was kind of interesting that they had thought of trying to get the fish upstream even back in the early 1900s. And there are still vestiges of the Sunol Aqueduct that remain today along Alameda Creek and Niles Canyon. Locals call it the secret sidewalk. It's, I think, very popular with teenagers who like to go out there and party. We are currently working with local agencies to look at refurbishing parts of the Sunol Aqueduct as part of a future trail system through Niles Canyon. Since the mid-19th century, Spring Valley Water Company, which was a privately held company, owned much of Alameda Creek watershed and held a monopoly on water service to San Francisco. In 1906, William Bowers Bourne II was the president of the Spring Valley Water Company and heir to the giant Empire gold mine. He hired Willis Polk to design a water temple atop the spot where the three subterranean water sources converged: Alameda Creek, Arroyo de la Laguna, and the Pleasanton well fields. At the time, there was just a shed that protected the water as it cascaded down from in this area. And in an article that I read, that shed was also described as a rude shed, which I thought was kind of fun. So why build a water temple? You know, when I remember walking and driving by that temple many times and wondering, why is this temple in the middle of a field? It's seemingly in the middle of nowhere. Well, some say that Bourne was determined to make a statement about water and its mythical qualities dating back to Roman times. And other sources claim that Bourne wanted to sell the water company to the city of San Francisco and saw the temple as a way to appeal to San Francisco voters who would have to approve the purchase. Earlier efforts to sell the company to San Francisco failed. Other sources claim that as one born into wealth and classically educated, that Bourne was partially motivated by a sense of civic responsibility. I don't think we'll ever know the true reason, but perhaps it was a combination of all three of those. So Bourne chose Willis Polk to design the temple. And Polk was a distinguished architect at the time who was known for his bold and original designs and for having a passionate devotion to Greek and Roman styles. He had designed the Filoli estate, which was the Bourne family estate in San Mateo. And he had designed many buildings throughout San Francisco and the Bay Area. And one thing that I didn't know is that he also designed the second Sierra Club logo, and he designed it to look like a wax seal. So Polk studied the designs of many round temples found throughout history, studying their proportions and details, comparing them to those being considered for the temple. Polk's design was modeled after the ancient temple of Vesta in Tivoli, Italy. Tivoli is where many of the waters that fed Rome converged in the foothills of the Apennines. Like the Sunol Temple, the Temple Vesta rests upon a magnificent cascade of water. Now, these two drawings show some of the steps of Polk's year-long design process and the evolution of the design of the water temple. He rejected plan after plan, drawing after drawing, over 50 in all during his design process. Polk apparently had a lifelong habit of self-criticism and often developed many iterations of a design until he found one that he was happy with. One obstacle to the design was the natural depression in the landscape that impacted the site of the temple. So Polk resolved that issue by raising the foundation of the temple 15 feet. He brought in about 50,000 cubic yards of fill to bring the base of the temple to the ground level of the valley floor. Another issue was a search for appropriate scale of the temple to find the proportion that would look normal with nature and a size that would harmonize with the surrounding environment. There were large cottonwood trees on the site, and they helped determine the size of the temple. And here's some pictures of the temple under construction. And you can see the foundation here that he designed to make so you could have a better view of the temple once it was finished. And here is a picture of the temple just after it was completed. Now, the 59-foot high classical temple is an elegant circular pavilion of 12 fluted Corinthian columns with a concrete ring girder that supports a conical wood and tile roof. And on top of the roof is a copper finial with 3 dolphins that are tail to tail. The inside of the roof covering, the cistern, has paintings depicting Native American maidens carrying water vessels. Inside the temple, water originally from the 3 sources from the watershed flowed into a white-tiled cistern before plunging into a deep water channel, carrying the water from the filter galleries down in the Niles Canyon Aqueduct, through Niles Canyon, across the bay near the Dumbarton Bridge. The stones around the top of the temple are inscribed with 2 water-themed biblical passages. I will make the wilderness a pool of water and the dry land spring of water, and the streams whereof shall make glad the city. And here are some of the details of the temple. This is a close-up of one of the Corinthian columns. And this is the finial with the dolphins on the top of the roof. And here is a close-up of one of the dolphins. And this is the interior of the ceiling of the temple. And the paintings were painted by a Chinese artist, Yun Gi. And as you can see, there's some spaces in between the beams and some outlines, and the paintings were never finished. And some say that they were never finished because the project ran out of money and they couldn't complete it. And there's another story that says Polk came out to the site to check on the project and found the artist, Yun Gi, drunk on the job, and Polk fired him on the spot. So we may never know the real reason why the paintings were never finished. And these are some close-ups. There are some portraits that are painted on some of the beams and the ceiling. And the one in the middle is the artist, Yun Gi. And then there were several portraits. Some of them had names, some of them didn't. These 2, Virginia and Imogene, are ones that I wanted to show you. There were, I think, probably at least half a dozen portraits. And I tried to figure out who these women were. I thought maybe they were related to the architect or the Bourne family, but I couldn't find any relation. So maybe they're just colleagues of the artist and people that he knew. And this picture on the left is the tiled cistern. You can see the water plunging down as it would be heading towards the aqueduct. And then this is a picture of the filter gallery going towards the temple. And this is on the top. This is what you can see. It's still there. It's not in very good shape. We don't allow anybody to walk on it because it's very fragile. And Polk's design also included landscaping, and this is the temple here, and there's oops, sorry. Let me go back a second. There's landscaping along Temple Road. He also designed a carrefour at the intersection of these 4 roads here. And this is looking at the carrefour and looking down Temple Road towards the temple. And this is a close-up of the carrefour. This is a serpent here, and I think a maiden right up here. And then this is a closer look at the landscaping along Temple Road. All of that landscaping has been changed over time. That original landscaping is no longer there. So there's also a long history of ranching and farming in the Sunol Valley and the watershed. And you might see cattle on our watershed lands today, and they are representative of the Sunol Valley's rich ranching history that began with Mission San Jose, located in Fremont. And founded in 1797, the mission's land stretched into Alameda Creek watershed to support crops, horses, sheep, and the largest herd of cattle of any California mission. And Mexico secularized the missions in 1834, and the land was distributed for private ownership as rancheros, then later to private ranchers and farmers. This area once supported many types of farms across its wide reach. At different times and in different areas, the valley supported orchards and vineyards and strawberries, vegetables, wheat, oat, barley, cattle. And as you can see, one entrepreneur used the temple for their brand, the temple brand of walnuts. And the history, this long history of agriculture is still going on today. And one example of that is the Sunol Egg Park, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. And we still work with ranchers to graze cattle on our watershed lands. Responsible cattle grazing helps fuel load and keeps fire danger down. Over the decades, the temple has been very popular with visitors, from women with parasols to dog walkers, and even the occasional wedding. Families often picnicked under the large bay and sycamore trees near the temple. Unfortunately, over the years, the temple fell into disrepair. The picnic area was closed and visitor hours were severely limited. The temple was badly damaged in the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake. There was talk about demolishing the temple, but after working with local community groups, the SFPUC decided to restore it. So the roof of the temple was removed, and the paintings and other decorative parts of the temple were taken to the Oakland Museum for restoration. Scaffolding surrounded the temple for the better part of a year while the structure was reinforced. Holes were bored down through the center of the columns and steel rods were inserted. The original painting of the inside of the dome was painted without any primer. And when I heard that, I thought, oh, that can't be good. But consequently, because of that, the paint soaked into the wood. And because there was no primer, that essentially saved the painting. If the primer had been used, it's likely that the paintings would have just flaked off eventually. So and you can see the wood grain is visible in the paintings. And the oil-based paints used on the wood panels, they did have some deterioration, and there was some powdering and flaking off, and those areas were stabilized by the restorationists. And the paintings were conserved rather than completed or repainted. There was no attempt to add color. The empty places in the ceiling will never be filled, and the finished product looks mellow but intact, and it looks old but well cared for. Fumigation was completed and bird droppings were removed. There was evidence of staining and damage due to water seepage, and decay to the wooden elements was almost everywhere, especially near bolt holes. There are some pictures, here's some pictures of the restored parts of the ceiling. And if you look closely at the beam, second beam from the right, it looks like the artist may have painted his beverage of choice. So maybe there is some truth to the story of him being fired on the job. The main beams were assembled on site and lifted back into place. The restoration project was completed in 2001 and cost $1.2 million, including seismic and accessibility upgrades. The project won the prestigious 2001 Preservation Design Award from the California Preservation Foundation. So if you have one water temple, you might as well have another one because, you know, two is better than one. So the Polk Water Temple on the peninsula was erected by the San Francisco Water Department to commemorate the 1934 completion of the Hetch Hetchy Aqueduct and is located at the aqueduct's terminus. The temple was designed in the Beaux Arts style by William Merchant, a San Francisco architect trained by Bernard Maybeck. Merchant's design is similar in some ways to the Sunol Water Temple. It has fluted columns, Corinthian columns, and it reflects the architecture of ancient and Greek Romans, and those engineering methods were used to build the new water system. But it's different in that the Polk Temple doesn't have a roof, and it also has this lovely reflecting pool. Artist and master stone carver Albert Bernasconi brought Merchant's drawings to life, and he engraved in the stone around the top of the temple, "I give waters in the wilderness and rivers in the desert to drink to my people." And that's just to express the city's joyful relief at its new source of reliable water. And there was a huge party to celebrate this big event of having water coming all the way from Hetch Hetchy. And about 20,000 people came to the celebration, and it was broadcast live on the radio. And one interesting fact is that when they had the celebration, they used a wooden model of the temple for the 1934 celebration because the temple wasn't finished yet. So the temple was actually finished in 1938. So now we're going to talk a little bit about what's going on in and around the temple today. And this is a plan, a view of the area around the temple. This is the temple here. The picnic grounds are down here. Alameda Creek is over here, and the Arroyo de la Laguna runs this way over here. And this is our new corporation yard that was finished about a year ago. Oops, sorry about that. This is the Sunol Ag Park. It's about an 18-acre farm that I'll talk about in a minute. This is the site where we are constructing the Alameda Creek Watershed Center. And we have a new native plant nursery that I'll talk about in a minute too. And this is the quarry operation that's ongoing. And let's see, so the Sunol Ag Park is an 18-acre organic farm that was established in 2006. And it fosters sustainable farming and public education programs while protecting natural resources in the Alameda Creek watershed. And the SFPUC and the Alameda County Resource Conservation District are partnering to provide land and technical assistance to farmers and hands-on environmental education programs for Bay Area school children. It's really wonderful to see school children come out and pick a fresh strawberry and eat it and hold a praying mantis in their hand and learn about where their food comes from and how we can protect the natural resources while also growing local healthy food. And the Ag Park is really a thriving urban edge farm and home to 6 small-scale organic farming enterprises that produce delicious local fresh food. So the Alameda Creek Watershed Center, which is currently under construction, will be a 13,000 square foot building, and as well as a 2.5 acre formal botanical garden. The building includes exhibit space, a classroom, and a community gathering space. When developing the themes for the interpretive master plan for the center, usually you develop one theme for a project like this, but we ended up with 2 themes, and one is focused on the temple and the other is focused on water. And it just felt really right that the temple should be a big part of this project. And there will be an exhibit inside about the construction of the temple. And the center will be a gathering place for increasing the awareness and appreciation of the natural, cultural, scenic, and recreation resources of the Alameda Creek watershed, while increasing awareness and appreciation of the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission water supply system, including its history and current operation. The center will be also be a hub for regional trail system and support the needs of the local community by providing space for meetings and other special events. And the building is scheduled to be completed in spring of 2022. And here are some renderings of the outside of the building. And as you can see, you can see one view of the temple, and there's lots of views from inside the building, from all around of the temple. And the center was designed to feel like it's part of the landscape, and we really took a lot of care not to take away from the temple. And the landscaping really is designed to represent the different habitats in the Alameda Creek watershed. And so you are basically walking through these different habitats from the top of the watershed all the way down to the bay. And we've got interpretive signs outside that explain the different habitats. And yeah, okay. So during the pre-construction excavation for the Watershed Center, we uncovered over 13,000 artifacts related to the Native American tribes, the Muwekma Ohlone, and those included beads and abalone pendants and mortars and pestles, as well as cooking hearths and burials. And there's evidence from what we found that there's been continuous habitation of the area near the Sunol Temple for at least 2,000 years. And the lands of the Alameda Creek watershed were originally inhabited by the Muwekma Ohlone tribe for an estimated 5,000 years. And we're grateful and really proud that the Muwekma Ohlone tribe members have worked so closely with SFPUC staff on the construction of the Alameda Creek Watershed Center. And we're honored to be sharing their history both inside and outside the center. So the SFPUC constructed the Sunol Native Plant Nursery to support native plant landscaping. And since many of the plants that will be grown at the nursery will be planted on our watershed lands, we needed to make sure that these plants are pathogen-free so they won't impact the native habitats in the watershed. So we built this state-of-the-art nursery designed specifically to keep pathogens from growing. And these are pathogens that cause sudden oak death and other really detrimental diseases that can just really decimate our natural landscapes. And so our staff implements best management practices at the nursery, things like having the plants up on tables so that they're not sitting in water, and heat treating the soil to kill any potential pathogens that are in the soil. And we have baths that people have to step through before they enter the nursery to clean their feet. And it's, we really consider it a clean space so that no pathogens are going to be growing there. And we also test on a regular basis plants to make sure that we don't have any plants. And so far we haven't, nursery's been up and running for about 1.5 years. And so far we have a clean bill of health. We haven't grown any pathogens. So that's pretty exciting. And the staff grew over 30,000 plants for the new corporation yard that we finished last year, and are growing over 40,000 plants that we're going to be planting at the Watershed Center. And the nursery will also support mitigation and restoration efforts in the Alameda Creek watershed. So although the access to the Sunol Temple is currently closed while we construct the Watershed Center, I hope that when the center is completed in 2022, that you will come and visit the temple and the new Watershed Center and everything that the area has to offer. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you all may have. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Carla. And fascinating presentation. And also, I think it generated a lot of excitement, at least for me, with the Watershed Center. So I'm looking forward to that. A few questions came in. And so can you talk in a little bit more detail about SFPUC's work with the Muwekma Ohlone tribe?
Sure. So when we started originally planning the center, we were thinking about, what did we want to educate people about, and what did we want to, types of exhibits did we want to have in the center. We felt it was really important to have some exhibits that talked about the history of Native American tribes in the valley. And so we reached out to the Muwekma and we told them that we were holding space in the center for them to tell whatever story wanted. And they, I think, were a bit shocked. Nobody ever offered that to them before. And so we worked with them really closely for probably 1.5 years, developing an exhibit, developing interpretive signs outside that talk about how they used plants and, how they lived. And so that was all, all great. We did all that. And then we started doing the excavation, the pre-construction excavation, and we started finding burials and artifacts. And it was about 1.5 years of work, working closely with the tribe and the archaeologists. And it was hard for the tribe, to find their relatives. And so we, had lots of meetings and worked with them. We wanted to make sure they were comfortable with how we were moving forward. And we also realized that we had to completely redo the exhibit that we had talked about, because we wanted to do something that was going to really reflect the importance of this site. And so we are just now finishing that work, and we're also developing what we're calling a reflection site on the site outside, which is just a sort of a place where you can come and sit and just think about what was there, the role of the Native American tribes in our history, and we're continuing to work with them. We want to work with them to develop education programs that we can have at the site. And it's been, I think, a really, it's, for me personally, it's been a very meaningful and fulfilling relationship to work with them on this. And it's really, I think, brought a lot to the center and to all of us. So
I thought it was very interesting that that site had been occupied for thousands of years.
Yeah.
And I think it's important that SFPUC's telling that story in the future Watershed Center.
Well, it's interesting because it was, if you think about it, it's sort of the ideal place to live, because you've got, it's the, these two big creeks coming together. It's a really relatively flat area. So, it just sort of, I mean, we were expecting to find some things there. We didn't realize we were going to find as much as we did. Yeah.
That's very cool. Couple questions about the site itself. The Linda who's one of your neighbors actually from Niles Canyon Railroad, she wanted to know about the intersection, and this is a chicken or the egg story. Was the intersection there prior to the temple, or was the temple there before the intersection?
I don't know, but my guess is that the intersection was probably there, because I think, there was our corporation there has been there for a long time. There was an old adobe that was part of a ranch there, so my guess is that the intersection was there before but they put in the gate and at the Carrefour and all that, so that part wasn't there.
Okay. And then John did some quick research, and he found on a site that there apparently were 3 temples. And then so if we have Sunol and Polgus, where's the 3rd?
He told me that, and I tried to find it.
Okay.
I got to find the 3rd one. We don't own it. I don't know. I couldn't find it. So
fair enough.
Now I'm curious. I want to go see if I can find it and go visit.
Well, we aim to serve, so there's your research project.
All right.
Was the temple roof savable? Was it lost? Was it rebuilt? How was the roof itself handled?
The roof, my understanding is that the roof itself was in pretty good shape, and they just took it off and cleaned it. And the wood part was the part that was in the worst shape for sure.
And you and I have talked about this. I love the story of the drinking artist. I think that's much more fun than the project running out of money.
Me too. And I just love that he painted his jug on the ceiling there.
Yeah, you're sort of giving away the store at that point. The native plant nursery, you had seemed to indicate that it's open and up and running. Is that?
Yes.
Okay.
It's been running for about 1.5 years. We've grown probably 40,000 plants, I would say.
All right. And speaking of the plants, the second part of that question is, do you have riparian plants there?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So one thing I failed to mention is that we have collected all of the seed for the plants that we are growing for the Watershed Center. They're from the Watershed. So our biologists have gone out and at the appropriate time collected the seeds. And yeah, I mean, the plants that we're growing will really showcase all the different kinds of plants that you would see if you hiked from the top of the Watershed all the way down to the bay.
And then is the thought to sell plants to the public?
We've thought about that. We're not quite there yet. We're really focusing on getting these plants ready for the Watershed Center, but I think that it's a possibility in the future.
Okay. We live in an age where we tend to worry about climate change. And does the SFPUC have concerns with how that might impact the water supply?
Yeah, I would say most definitely. Assuming that, our climate change scientists are correct, we are anticipating that we're not going to have as much snowpack in the future. And, we really consider the snowpack basically this big reservoir up in the Sierras, and, it melts, and then we can store that in our local reservoirs. And if we're not going to have snow, then we're going to have probably more rain, and holding that, we don't have the capacity to hold all that water if it's not being held as snow. So, I think there's lots of different things that we look at, and, we really need to look at diversifying our water portfolio. And that could mean looking at additional storage, dams, building more dams, looking at using recycled water, looking at desalination, looking at using more groundwater. We have a really robust water conservation program. We have, we provide rebates for low flow toilets. We have inspectors that go out and do home inspections for people and tell them how they can save more water. So, I mean, it's really looking at this from all different aspects and trying to figure out, how there's not going to be one answer for solving this problem for sure.
Okay, and then speaking of water, since the restoration of the temple and the construction of the Watershed Center, will water once again flow through the temple?
Well, water does flow through the temple. It's not, it's not part of our municipal drinking supply anymore, but we have to utilize a water right. And so to do that, we release water and run it down through the temple. And so that's why there's water in the temple, but it's not used for, nobody uses it to drink for their households or anything.
How were the remains that were discovered on site from the native tribe handled? Were they reinterred somewhere? What was the thought with that?
So the tribe requested that we do some testing of the remains. So there was DNA testing done and various other tests. And we are currently, working with the tribe to find a place to permanently reinter the remains.
Okay. Other than that, I think that's it for questions for us. However, a couple comments came in. Everybody wanted to thank you for the presentation.
My pleasure.
And it looks as though you have some visitors. There's the Porsche Club drives by the site a lot, and now they have something that they can talk about when they get there.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
right.
very cool.
Next year we'll be, a little over a year from now, hopefully, we'll be open, and you all can come down and take a look.
Okay. Well, Carla, you answered my questions as far as why that classical temple was sitting out in the field, and excellent. I feel a lot better about it now. So thank you for your presentation and all the research you did for us for this program.
No problem. It was fun. I enjoyed it.
Good. And I want to thank all of you for viewing this morning and sending in the questions and the thoughts that you had. If you missed any of our earlier programs, you can find them by visiting the museum's website at museumsrv.org. And today's program with Carla will appear early next week.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so you'll get a reprise.
Okay, great. I can show it to my mom.
There you go. Our next program will be on Thursday, March the 18th at 11:30. We are pleased to have back historian for the town of Dublin and past president of the Dublin Historical Society, Steve Minier. You may remember Steve. He did a presentation for us on Highway 21. And this time around, his presentation is titled Camp Parks, When War and National Security Came to the San Ramon and Amador Valleys. Steve will talk about the key role that Camp Parks played in the war in the Pacific during World War II. If you like these programs and want them to continue, we ask that you make a donation by going to the museum's homepage, museumsrv.org, and click on the Donate Now button. We hope to open sometime in the near future, and so we are always in need of volunteers. If you have some time, please contact the museum. I again thank Carla. I hope you enjoyed today's presentation. Stay safe, and thank you all for watching.
All right. Thank you. Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.